Well, everybody, I have been waiting to have this episode for some time, and I'm super excited. I hope you are too. Welcome, Dundee, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited too.
Well, this story, some people have followed along, I think, a little bit, but before we get into all the good stuff here, I gotta hear your story. How did you get into the world of flowers? And then how did you get this crazy idea to create a new product for our industry?
Well, it all started with a man.
Oh no, this is gonna be one of
So,
those stories.
so I met an Englishman who was living and working in London. I had was divorced with four children, and so we moved to London, and we had been there a year or so. And my two youngest are twins, and they were about 15 at the time, 14 or 15. And one day they said, "Mom, you know what? We got this. We're good. Go find something to do." And because, I was hanging around the school with all the other moms and that kind of thing. And so I had been talking to my husband, who had a very, very busy job. And I kept saying, what the heck am I going to do? Got to find something to do, but I don't want to do something just to do something. And one evening I was in our laundry room working with flowers for a dinner party or something. And he said from the living room, he goes, why don't you take a flower course? I thought, wow, okay. Anyway, I did and loved it, but was scared to death. But we lived around the corner from a company called Jane Packer Flowers in central London. And at that time, she was pretty iconic. And her shop window was absolutely magnificent. And I kept walking by and thinking, oh, could I ever go in and ask if they need any help? And one day I did. And there was this wonderful, wonderful woman named Deanna Maya at the desk, who is still a dear friend. And I said, very shyly, like, do you need any free help? And she said, oh, yes, please. And she took my hand and took me down to the workroom at Jane Packer Flowers, which was very, very busy. It was right before the holidays. And there were all these quite young people down there. And they kind of looked at me like, what? Who? And so, anyway, they put me to work sweeping the floors and cleaning vases, which I loved. And I did end up being promoted to head of business development several years later. But I started out sweeping the floors and cleaning vases for years. And one day we did huge events, as you
Sure.
probably know, Jane Pecker did. And we one day had done a huge event for Simon Cowell and Victoria Beckham. It was at the Savoy Hotel. It was tree. It was a tree on every table, which there were 25 72-inch round tables.
Wow.
Massive, massive event, massive amounts of traditional floral foam. At that point, we were in about, say, 2007 or 8 at that time, and we knew floral foam, like not to touch it and touch our eyes, and we knew not to pull it down off shelves, it would get in our eyes. And we didn't know the full extent about the environment and that kind of thing, but we definitely knew it was not great. Anyway, we were taking one day, the day after this event, the truck drove back and beep, 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 and dumped all this foam over. I mean, just kept dumping foam with flowers in it. And our job was to take the flowers out and put them in the compost and then take the foam. And of course, it goes in a plastic bag, a big black bag, and you drag it across the floor if you can with all your might and chunk it into the landfill can. And after about 3 or 4 hours of us all doing this, I looked at the manager and said, "Is the best we can do? Is there not something more environmentally friendly?" And she said, "Dundee, there's not. If you can come up with something, you will change the you'll change the industry and you'll revolutionize it." And so that was always in my mind. Of course, I'm not a scientist, and a lot of people wanted to do what I wanted to do. But what happened, divine intervention or whatever it is, fast forward, we were going to move to California in 2013, 14. So I was going to open my own school. And I was in my beautiful space in Healdsburg, California in 2014. And a friend of mine who was a scientist, a partner in Genentech in San Francisco, came in to see me. And I was working in traditional foam. And I said, God, Leonard, I really hate this stuff. I wish we could come up with a healthy version alternative. And he said, you know, it's weird. I've got a young friend who's coming through town this weekend. He's doing an internship at Berkeley, but he's getting ready to go study under a very famous polymer scientist named Professor Mark Hillmeyer and getting his chemist degree in polymer science at the University of Minnesota this fall. This was midsummer. Anyway, I met this guy, this young man. He was probably early 20s at the time. His name is David Goldfield. And we talked, and he said, you know, let me present this to Professor Hillmeyer, the problem. Let's see if polymers would be a good solution. The university, I don't know if they take projects on, but let me pursue it. A few months later, I got a call, and it was from David and Professor Hillmeyer. And Professor Hillmeyer said, you know what? I think this is a really, really good solution. Would you all be willing to sponsor it financially? So Leonard and his partner and my husband and myself sponsored this project through the university. And that was 2014. And that's really how this got started. That's the birth of Phoam.
Wow. And so then at that point, like, was it still in the early stages of trying to prove concept? Was it like, how long did that process, if you funded a project, how long did it take for that to actually come to fruition?
A long time.
Yeah,
And
that's what I was
I am
thinking.
not known for my patience. And but in the meantime, I was really involved with my school and teaching floristry, and I loved all of that. So it was kind of like I pretended like it wasn't really happening because it was really frustrating. Science has a pace, and Dundee has her pace, and the two do not work well together. And so I was a bit of a pain to these scientists, and what do you mean another month to? But it's the way it goes, and that is that they were not going slow. It is just the way it goes. So I kind of had to put it in the back of my world. Um, there was a moment in probably somewhere around maybe 2018 or so, 5 or 6 years into it, where I said to them, the scientists, like, all right, I know you all, they'd written papers, they were doing great work. They had a paper published and lots of notoriety, but we had to produce a product. And we kept putting money into this. And at one point I said to the two of them on a call, I said, okay, and you've done great work. This is, we've done well. Tell me the truth. Like, should we know when to hold them? Is this when to hold them? Because we just can't keep putting money into something. What do you think? Tell me the real story. And there was a long silence
Mm.
on the phone, and they both said, you would be crazy to quit right now. And at that point, I spoke to my husband, who was still working in London, and I was in California. He was back and forth. I was back and forth. And I said to him, this could be a real thing. And I'm not a business person. I need some help here. And he worked at a very fancy company. He was a head partner in a headhunting company, a global headhunting company. And, they wore dark suits, black socks, black shoes. You had to sign into their office. And I said, you take your suit off, and let's put your jeans on. And it took a while. I'd say it took a year or two for him to sort of, and then COVID hit. And
Right.
he said, okay. And he could see that this was a real thing. And so he's a CFO, had been a CFO. He's a great foil to me. And because he is patient and he sees the big picture, he's got a wonderful business sense. He's super calm. And so and then the other big thing that happened was we got our patents approved. So we had applied on 25 counts to patents in both the US and Europe. That took 2 years. So
Wow.
those came, yeah. And they fought back, as they always do, once or twice. They always do that. So we had then apply again. And so that was a big, big thing, getting those patents. Also, I guess it was about 2022, we had made our first very real prototypes.
When was that
Brick
again?
size. That was probably 2022, maybe 21, but we had our real prototype. And we got asked to be involved, participate in something called the MN Cup, the Minnesota Cup. It's the biggest startup. It's like, what are they called? Shark Tank. It's that kind of thing. And it's the biggest one in the US. I think there were 2,600 companies, startups invited to be in this. And over 3 months, they nominate a winner after going through all kinds of things,
Right.
which was really something. It was good. It was super hard. I mean, the judges were hard on us, and yeah, but it was amazing. Anyway, it's kind of to nominate the company that they think is the most successful, has the most chance of really being a successful company. We ended up winning that.
Oh my goodness.
And it was amazing. And we also won the Green Award, the Green Chemistry Award, which was really wonderful. So at that time, 2022, we didn't mean to be undercover, but all of a sudden we weren't undercover anymore. So people really started coming to us. We realized we needed to do a round of fundraising. We did. We did that in January of 2023. And we couldn't get everybody in. We raised $3 million. And we had to tell some people, I'm sorry, it's full. And which was that was a tough time to raise money. And so it was friends and family. Since then, we've done we're probably going to do another round of fundraising, but we did friends and family we did a round of the 3 million, and we probably will do one more, probably. But anyway, so those were sort of big milestones. And then we started really making a lot of prototypes, sending them out to florists to try in the last 6 months. So that's kind of where we are now. We are laser focused on going to market, commercialization, and they call that time that's the valley of death.
Why?
So we've been in the valley of death for a while, because that is the time when most companies, it is the hardest time. Most companies, that's like when a lot of companies will fail. There's a lot of good ideas out there, but to get a prototype, and then you get a good prototype, but can you commercially make it?
Right.
That's called the valley of death. And so we've been in the valley of death for about a year. But we have had a wonderful, sort of exciting, unexpected situation. Last week, we actually made foam on a commercial machine for the first time successfully. And so the guy that told me, oh, you're in the valley of death, he's a good friend. I had to send him an email and say, we are officially out of the valley of death. But it has been, I gave a talk to one of the garden clubs. I think it was the Houston Garden Club. And it was really emotional because these women were saying, how have you done this? Tell me about the trials and it has been, there have been so many moments, Scott, where, I wasn't sure that we should go on. And, but I have 4 children, grandchildren, friends with grandchildren, young friends. And when something like this is put in your path, I couldn't stop, because what if I didn't try? And there's a book I read that really spoke to me. I read it a long time ago and I pulled it back off my bookshelf a few months ago, but it's called The Road Less Traveled. It's by M. Scott Peck. And it talks about in all of our lives, no matter what we're battling, whether, we're all battling all kinds of things all the time. And those are the mounds that we are put in front of us as human beings that make life worth living and exciting and battling for. And we can choose as human beings to go around them or over them or under them, or we can go through that mound and get bloodied and battered and bruised. And we come out, and almost 100% of the time, we are better human beings for it, and the world is a better place. And so I pulled that book out and I thought, Dundee, you're just getting battered and bruised, because you cannot imagine the doors that have shut in our face over and over and over, because no one has ever done this before. No one has made this material. That's why we're patented. No one has made it on the machines that we're making it on. I keep saying, let's go find the experts to our team of 8. And they say, they go out and try to find them, and they come back and say, we're the experts.
Wow. Like there's
Because
nobody
no
else
one,
that's thought of this, or no one else, or maybe it's this application, or yeah.
we have the patent on PLA, open cell polymer. So we're an open cell polymer. So if you were to talk about a closed cell polymer, you would be talking about, say, a fork that's compostable or a compostable plate. That doesn't take up anything, right? That's why you can put food on it.
Mm-hmm.
Our foam is an open cell polymer. It takes up all sorts of things, but it takes up water. And so no one has made an open cell polymer, and no one has made it on the machine, the commercial machine, the way we are making it. No one ever has done that. We didn't even know we could do it until a company that's this expert in this said, we think we can make this a different way. Traditional floral foam is made in a batch foamer. It's made like loaves of bread. So you put the material in these huge machines, and then they heat them up or whatever they do, and they look like massive loaves of bread. And then they cool them, and then they cut off all the skin, and you get these huge blocks of traditional floral foam. And then they cut them up into whatever shape. We're going to make ours. I'm not sure if I can say how or not, but I have to be careful. But it's a completely different way of making it on a different machine. It's much cleaner. It's much faster. It's a much more environmentally friendly way to make it, but no one's ever done it. So, but we've now done it. And so we go to try to find people to help us, just to, one thing to make the material, and the other thing to actually, manufacture the material on a new machine in a new way. No one's ever done any of this.
Yeah. Well, I know this, that, I have not been an advocate for traditional floral foam for many years. Honestly, I will say that I never really liked it, but as I started the podcast, and it was about that time where there was a lot more conversation about the environmental impact and the health impact and all these things that, we just didn't, I don't know, maybe we suspected, but we didn't understand. And, my disdain for it has only grown. And I know there's been some alternative products that have been put out into the market. And honestly, at the time I was hopeful. I'm like, oh, maybe this will solve some problems. But then when I see them in person, I'm kind of like, I'm not as optimistic as you know, as the marketing led me to be. And
Mm-hmm.
and now when I saw people using your product, and obviously they were prototypes at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but as I've seen that more and more people using it and things like that, I'm kind of like, this looks like this could be the answer. And the more I've read about it, the more I've seen what you guys are doing, I'm more excited about this being a possible alternative than, or a very viable alternative than anything we've ever had. And the fact that there's never been this product before is just so amazing. So, what is it made out of?
So it's cornstarch, field corn. It's made. The material comes from Nebraska, and of course, the company that we use that we where we get that from uses all the most sustainable methods of farming. We need to be we need to know every single way, everything we've been careful about from beginning to end, from being born to going back into the earth, because we had to be 100% compostable. But otherwise, no reason to make this. So it's made of corn. It has food coloring in it, which is food. Everything else in it is food grade because it has to be to compost. It's foamed with CO2, but the nice thing is the CO2 goes right back into the earth. So basically, we have this cycle and it goes right back into the earth. So we really can say we are earth to earth. Basically, we say we borrow the CO2. It was interesting. Let's be fair to traditional floral foam and say what they do very well. It works really well. It's I know it was an accident when they created it, but it works so well, and that's why it's been so difficult to make something to as an alternative. And so you're asking a foam to have the right rigidity so that it holds your stems in place so that you can take it to an event without it falling apart. So it has to have the right rigidity. It has to have the right density, like floral foam, traditional foam. It accepts all the stems, whether they're chocolate cosmos or a sweet pea or a hellebore or a sunflower or a delphinium, right?
Even
So
those
it
really
has to
thin
hold all those.
stems?
They love this foam. They love our foam. It's so weird because it almost feels like styrofoam,
That's what it
and
looks like, yeah.
it smells like maple syrup to me. But it is so fun. I mean, um, this is a fake flower, but you can see how thin that is,
Yeah.
and it just goes right in. You know,
And it's not even wet at this point.
no, it's not even wet. So, but the other thing, of course, it has to take up water and hold on to enough water to keep the flowers alive without any water added for at least 3 days for an event, and however long in a vase with water. And then it has to compost. Okay, so I tell people, because I'm a woman, I can say this, but I tell people, like, how women, we have to be, or we're supposed to be sort of great cooks and great moms and great wives and, great mothers and great sisters and, drive carpool and we have to look like Cindy Crawford, while we're doing that. I said, that's really what we're asking of you. But the other thing that's interesting about our foam is that I said to the team, it has to be exactly like a traditional floral foam. But as life goes, we know, you can want something and sometimes you get something different, but it might be better in some ways. And so I've had to also change my expectations, not only of the timing of this, because it's been 10 years, but
Wow.
also to accept that, but also to accept that this foam was going to teach me a lesson or two. And so this is a prototype, and it's going to change as we manufacture it in the way that we hope to, and are doing, really. But it's lighter, so it doesn't take up as much much water as traditional foam. But so that was a big deal. I'm like, no, it's got to take up 96% water like traditional foam. Well, do you need 90? The scientists are like, well, Dundee, do we need 96% water? Is that what's keeping the flowers alive?
Okay.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Yes, partly, but also there's a lot of things in traditional floral foam that we can't use in our foam because it wouldn't compost if we did. So anyway, it's very interesting because I kept pushing for more water, and what the scientists found out is it's not just the water that's keeping those flowers alive in traditional floral foam. So that was a limit, and then they're saying, do you really need 96%? No. And we don't want to use more water than we need to use. So how much water do we really need? So it's taking up about 25 to 30% water right now. We think we're going to get more water. And also it's a matter of how much it loses, right? So
Right.
we hold on to more water. We don't take up as much water, but because of that, it's lighter weight and it floats. So then we're like, oh, darn it, I don't want it to float. Well, florists are engineers. And so we're sending it to florists and we're saying, it's lighter weight, it floats, you've really got to wedge it in or tape it down. And they're like, oh, so someone did this amazing arrangement where they took this and they put it in a big glass vase and they floated it. And they did all these beautiful flower stems through it in a perfect, angle. And you just saw this wonderful illumination of the stems and this beautiful thing floating in the water because this doesn't shed any color. It keeps your water perfectly clear. So here this, and I thought, oh my God, but it does, that's one difference. And then the other difference is that it does take up water again. So with traditional foam, you really don't ask it to take up more water. It's not really supposed to. But this, if you use it on one side, well, even if you use it and you could literally dump water on top of it and it will take up just as much water again. But if you want to reuse it, you can let it dry out and or not, whatever, halfway, and you can then re-soak it. So that's another difference, is that it takes up water again. It's reusable, which is a really big deal. So it's been funny for my expectations of this, and then to kind of have it, like, I never thought about it not shedding. I never thought about is that important? Does it, because it colors your water?
Right.
But right,
Yeah.
this does not leak at all. Does not color your water. It stays perfectly clear. So anyway, it's been interesting, but it is definitely, I guess my point is, Scott, it is a hard thing, which is why no one's been able to do it, to replace, like for like traditional floral foam. It's so good at what it does, but the cost of it, we can't use it. We just cannot.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
there's a lot of
it's
costs to it. A lot of different kinds of costs. Let me so now I think you mentioned to me, I don't know if you've mentioned it in our recording, but I know that we've talked about it, that it's being produced in Europe right now. Like the very first
manufactured.
run,
Yes.
manufactured in Europe. So are you
Yes.
shipping corn from Nebraska there right now, or are there plans to grow that in Europe, or how does that work?
Absolutely. So that's what we're working on. Is our goal is, and we are already deep into this. There's another company. There's two main companies that we use. One is European and one is American. They both ship to each country, but we are trying to use the European one for the Europe manufacturing and the U.S. for the American. The one cost that we have is that we are driving with a truck at this point our material from Nebraska to the south where we're making it. So there is that cost to the environment. That's the one cost we have. And this is the other thing that we've had a lot of criticism, and I don't mean in a mean way, and we welcome it because we want to be completely transparent. I think that's what the world wants right now from everybody.
Yeah.
is just tell us who you are. And then we'll decide. Like for me, I want to know about makeup, like what is it, what's in it, and then I can decide.
Hmm.
So, but and I think you and I might have talked about this, but no matter what you do, you're not really sustainable, because if you're making a product, there's no flower arrangement that's 100% sustainable. Even people that are really um, just rabid about sustainability, the florist. I was teasing one of them recently because he or she was doing a big conference across the world, and they're really, all about sustainable options in floristry. And I said, "Oh, are you swimming over there?" And they looked at me like, "Oh my God, Dundee." And I said, "I'm just kidding you, but you, how are you going to get there? You're going to fly on an airplane."
Right.
So I think we want to tell everyone what we are and how what we're doing, but we also don't pretend there is no, we are as sustainable as we possibly can be, and we will continue to get better and better and better. But nothing is completely sustainable. No
Well,
floral arrangement, but what a sad world it would be. So we're
yeah.
just trying to offer the best we can.
Right.
We want
Well,
to
but
be
I
the best
mean,
we can.
when you think of it like that, then there is a environmental impact probably on making chicken wire or on making, these other products. I mean, so you're right. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's very few things, even food. I mean, there's very few things that have zero impact, but the but you just can't help but think that the good so far outweighs the small impact that is happening. I know that I've had conversations with past guests about this whole, and I'm probably going to misquote the phrase, but this whole circular, economy where, like you mentioned, it's from it comes from the earth,
Earth to earth.
earth to earth, and I think that's a really awesome deal. So many companies, refer to, and I want to make this distinction because sometimes I feel like, in fact, I've recently witnessed it and had a hard time with it, but terminology. For example, like, at one point people were saying that things were biodegradable. And then the
Mm-hmm.
reality was is it wasn't. And so then the terminology
Mm-mm.
changed to degradable, which is a more accurate term, but there's nothing organic about that process because it's not an organic product. So you're not using that phrase, which is one thing that's intriguing me. You're using the phrase compostable. And I know from past conversations with you and on your website, you make this distinction, and I want people to understand what this it means is like home compostable versus industrial
Mm-hmm.
compostable. And what's the difference? Why does it matter? and and exactly how long does it take for that to happen? Or maybe you're still doing that
Mm-hmm.
research, I'm not sure.
No, no, no. I can answer that pretty well. So first of all, let's talk about the difference in industrial compostability and home compostability. So we would love and hope to be home compostable, but we wanted to start out to get industrial compostability certification. Just for example, in the US, is what from what I understand, they do not even give a home compostability certification. The compostability gurus and the people that run them, they really don't like this home compostable thing because everybody does it. Like, let's say you have a compost situation in your backyard.
Sure.
Okay. Well, that might be different than your neighbor or whatever. We don't really know what you're using, and they don't know what you're using. So if you have a brick of foam and you want to compost it, what does that mean if it's home compostable? Does that mean you have a proper one that gets enough heat in it and that it's really going to compost? Or does it mean that you might think that you can dig a hole in your back garden and bury that. I mean, not even if you didn't think that, there's a lot of different thoughts about what it means to be home compostable. And it's not really this, it's not the same for any two people.
Right.
So the compostability people don't like that we're asking home composters to be responsible for getting it right, because it may not work. The industrial composters get it right. Everything is, to the T. So they suggested we do industrial compost for that reason. Also, because we will make a much bigger dent in getting rid of getting rid of
Landfill.
this. Yes, if we get a huge amount of it, like let's say you're an event florist in New York City, you're going to have 1,000 bricks of floral foam. Well, you're not going to go bury them of foam with a pH. I'm saying, what are you going to do? Bury them in your backyard? How many times can you do that? Or how? So how now? The thing I think that people are challenging us on is how many industrial compost places are there, facilities? Well, they're working on it, and there's a lot, but there needs to be a lot more. In California here, we have our trash collectors, we have 2 green bins. They come by every Tuesday and they pick up our bins with food in it and everything else to compost, just that. But we're probably not the norm in every city and every state in the United States of America.
Right.
So this is where the tricky thing comes in, and we've been criticized for being ahead of our time. And so, but is that really a bad thing that we're ahead of our time? I mean, we don't want to be behind the time. But the reason people are saying maybe we're ahead of our time is like there's not a compost industrial truck in every city. There, I don't know my numbers, but I know it's growing like crazy. And maybe it's even different in Europe. So this is where people are saying, yeah, but you're ahead of your time because there's not enough industrial compost to take it. I don't think that's true. I disagree with that, but that is where they're asking us to be home compostable. And like I said, in the US, they don't even do a certification because they don't believe in it.
That's sad.
So we are being certified by TUV in Europe, and we are nearly through it. So where we are now is they do a biodegradable test. It's the biodegradability. And I think I've forgotten the exact amount of days, like 90 days to biodegrade. So they take this with maybe something in it, or there's some flowers in it or whatever. They put it in the industrial compost. And we got a notification that after 17 days, the foam had biodegraded faster than the flowers in it. And by 25 days, it was gone. There was nothing to it. So we were completely biodegraded in 25 days. So that's a big deal. But that's the reality, Scott. And I think that the answer is going to lie in the compostability sort of group around the world. If they want to, I mean, because, we now are seeing that recycling, so much of what we recycle, like chicken wire, and I'm not against chicken wire. I'm not against any of it if it works and it's better than traditional floral foam. But even recyclable now, so much of it is ending up in places where it shouldn't be.
I agree.
So
right.
So we're just, again, this is the full transparency. We are doing what we think is best for the earth. And the fact that we are completely biodegraded in 25 days to nothing makes us really happy, because even fiber wool, is it called fiber floral or agro wool, it degrades over a very long period of time, even if you like using it, but it becomes volcanic ash. It's piles and piles and piles and bigger piles of volcanic ash. And then what do you do with it? You
Okay.
know, that's one of the big problems. And the problem with cocoa coir is the other sustainable option. And again, I'm not bashing any one product or any companies, because anybody that's trying, I'm like, yeah, good job. But you got to be, again, real. So cocoa coir is using so much water to be produced in these third world countries, and they can't afford to waste water. I think it's like 600 cubic meters to wash 1 cubic, 300 to 600 cubic meters of fresh water are used to wash 1 cubic meter of cocoa coir. And these are in places like Indonesia and Sri Lanka, and countries that all that water washes away and is contaminated, and then it's wasted. And so they're really cracking down, I know, in the indoor growing arena on cocoa coir because of the water that they're using it. So their problems are more at the front end of sustainability. Agri-wool is more at the end. But so everyone has their thing. But again, if those products work for you, then I say fantastic. But what we've been hearing is that the products that are made with agri-wool and rock wool don't really work. People don't like using them. And the same thing for the cocoa coir products. And so if they're not working, then that's really unsustainable, because you're making something that doesn't work.
Right. Or that's not being used to its full
Yeah.
potential because of whatever, the situation is. So let me ask a couple questions. One is, you made the distinction earlier that yours is foam with a pH. Why it's spelled PHOAM. So why pH? Is that a significant part of the name, or is that just clever marketing?
Well, we can't call it foam with an F,
Right.
because that's just a generic word. Of course, I found all this out when we were going through this process of finding a name, and it's not that easy to find a name, because as soon as you say anything generic, you're not allowed to use it. You can't use foam. So then it was a funny process. A women run design company. They do this. And so it was an interesting, like, they said, okay, what do you want? What do you see? Tell us everything. What do you want it to be? And I said, organic, scientific, new, techie. And we went through all these things. Like, I wrote them all down. And about 6 weeks later, we met with all of them. And they had this list of about 10 names. And the last one was foam, PHOAM, and it was written in big black letters. And we went through all of them, and we got down to the bottom, and I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's it, foam. It just spoke to me. It's kind of funny, because we are pH neutral,
How funny.
which which is interesting, because for indoor growing and hydroponics, which is another use that we're pursuing for this as a substrate, they're having the same problem that florists are, because they need a new substrate to grow in that's compostable and that's earth friendly. They're using rock wool, they're using cocoa coir, they're using peat moss, and they're using phenolic foam.
Yeah. That was one
So,
thing I never, many years ago when I was involved in growing more than I am now, I was always shocked. Like, I didn't realize there was an entire horticultural division for foam based products. And like, we would get our poinsettia cuttings in it, or we would get
uh-huh,
mum cuttings. I mean, we would just different things we would get in these pre-rooted little foam bricks
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
they used. And of course, now I'm seeing other people trying to do the same similar thing with like dahlias and other stuff, and these different cuttings, to do. And I just think, this is where I get excited, I think, because if everything is like you say, this could really be a game changer. And I believe you that it is. It's a game changer on a lot of levels, not even just floristry. I mean, there must be hundreds of applications for this product. So I know you have to be excited about that potential.
And guess what? Floral foam is going to be the bloody hardest one because again, it has to do all these things. There's so many other uses that people have come to speak to us about that are a lot that are probably a lot easier and probably bigger markets. But you know, I'm a florist and I started out trying to solve this problem, and we are going to solve this problem first. And I mean, I think the growing part of it is so relatable with it that it'll probably be the next one. But there's a lot. I mean, we're already ready for dry foam use.
Right.
So in the like if you go to Michael's or wherever and you see dry foam, you know, like what do they call it? What is that foam? You know, that you'd put dry craft foams.
Yeah. Yeah.
So craft foams, you know, they're made of styrofoam, polystyrene. So this is made of corn, and you can already sell this as a craft foam. So, but there's also a lot of other uses that I'm really not allowed to talk about, but that are completely different markets that are everybody's looking for, you know, earth to earth.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's a new material. It's never been made before. And it's, yeah. So because of that, I mean, I don't want to get ahead of myself or put the horse before the cart, but yeah, it's been a bit overwhelming. Some of these people that have come to talk to us about other uses.
Sure.
So who knows? You know, you
Well,
just take one thing at a time.
getting back to floristry, let's maybe talk about the process, because if you take one of these bricks, I know
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of people are used to their own way of doing it. You said it floats, so you have to obviously apply pressure, I'm guessing, to get it submerged, to get it to soak. Is that how long does that usually take, or do we know, or how does that work?
Mm-hmm. For me personally, I soak it and just see when the bubbles stop. We've said 90 seconds, but I don't think it takes that long. For me personally, it's somewhere between even 45 and 60 seconds. Um, and then what I do when I'm using it is if I'm going to use it in a vase, I wedge it in and then I add water, you know, to it. Um, but if you know, you can use it this way as well. Like if you know, if
Vertically?
you want to make it, if you want to make it proud, you can, you know what I mean? So in other words, that hits the bottom of your vase, and then you cut this to where it's slightly proud and you tape it down. Okay. But
Hmm.
if you do it this way and you wedge it in, you've got to make sure it's wedged in because it will float. Um, but I guess the worst case scenario, and again, as we make it and we get better at making it, hopefully it's going to become, it'll have less issues if they are issues. But you know, if it floats, it doesn't, like if you tape it down, it doesn't really matter. It, you know, it's like, oh, it hits the bottom of the vase more than it hits the, you know, whatever. It's still your structure there to make sure your flowers are where you want them to be. Um, I'm trying to think where it's a bad thing if it floats. But, you know, like I said, we've said this to so many florists and I've kind of apologized. They're like, we love that. Don't worry, it's fine. The other thing that I guess the biggest thing that we are realistic about is that we are saying 3 days without adding more water. So let's say you're going to do a flower wall. Okay. You soak foam with a pH and you put it up on your wall and you add the flowers in, or you're going to do a wedding arch, an arch for a wedding. You know, and depending on your flowers, if you're going to use narcissus, you're going to probably not get even 3 days if you put them in the first day. But floral foam doesn't either. Traditional floral foam, you really don't want to use narcissus in foam. And if
Right.
you do use them, if you're a seasoned florist and your bride really wants narcissus, you're going to put them in the morning of the wedding,
Right.
or
Last minute.
hydrangea or whatever else. So, and we're hoping again with our new way of producing this and manufacturing that we're going to get more and more water uptake and more water retention. But that is because traditional foam can last a week out of water unless it's super hot or whatever. But we are toe to toe in water. I mean, I've done and we've done so many trials. We are definitely a good 5 days in water and adding water, if not even more. But again, everybody's different. What flowers they use, what's the temperature,
Right.
and I don't want to overstate that. We are exactly like traditional floral foam, because that it is just the way it works is so darn good. And this does too, in a different way, but you're not hurting the earth, and it's so good for transport. It holds the stem so well, and it takes all stems so well, and it just works really well. But there are some differences that we want to be super clear about up front.
Yeah. Well, but I feel like if people are going to use a product like this, they don't what I'm hearing doesn't seem like it's a substantial trade-off at all. I mean, I know that there are other products that take longer to drink, also, and it's completely normal for that. The thing I'm amazed about is that flowers last with that smaller percentage of water in there. I mean, I know you're saying you're trying to work to get that number up, but I didn't realize how much water that other, the other product held,
Mm-hmm.
and just the weight of that alone. I mean, I
That's
remember
why it's so heavy.
I know. I remember there was a friend of mine that had this big wedding, and they had created out of foam this gigantic sphere, and it was so big, it was like, it literally, I think, fell apart at one point because it's so heavy. And, there's so much weight in all that water. If you don't need
I
it,
know.
yeah, if you don't need it, especially because you don't need it to last 5 days, you need it to last 24 hours, maybe, or maybe
That's what
48.
everybody,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what everyone has said. When I say, well, it's light, they're like, oh, great. That's
Yeah.
so much better for a flower wall. We don't have to. So it is, like I said, it has a life and a personality of its own. And that's what the only reason I sort of say this over and over again is I don't really, as natural as it is for florists to compare it to traditional floral foam. That's what they're going to do.
Right.
I kind of want them to look at it as foam with a pH is it's a whole new thing, just so they will figure out new ways to work in it that I'm not even going to think about, because they're
Sure.
so creative and they're such wonderful engineers. And so we've sort of has said this may change the way people design a little bit. So
Yeah. Well, of course, the number one question that people are going to ask is, when can we get it, and how will we get it? And I know that's been a question up until recently that maybe was not as black and white as it is now, but I don't know, maybe it isn't. So how can we get when can we look forward to seeing it, do you think?
So again, I don't want to overstate because I don't want to get people excited where I shouldn't, but we've made a huge leap a couple of weeks ago. It was a huge leap.
Out of the valley of
And
death.
we got out of the valley of death. And so, but what we are saying realistically is late summer, early fall, depending whether you're in Europe or the US. That's what I would feel comfortable saying. And it's hard. It's been really hard, Scott, because, it's kind of like I'm the waitress and the team is back in the kitchen. And so I'm out here like, oh, well, when can we get it? And I'm like, well, let's see. Let me, so I feel really vulnerable. And I want to be really thoughtful and careful when I answer these questions, because I don't want to disappoint anybody. But at this point, after our big jump, I feel better in being able to say that that's what we're offering.
So hopefully sometime this year,
Oh
sooner the
yeah.
better.
As
And
I can absolutely say this year.
yeah, and then I think when we talked before we started the recording, you had mentioned you are looking to wholesale options to be your channels of distribution. So if you're interested, I guess you need to say something to your local wholesaler so they can have their ear to the ground, so to speak, and
Yep.
keep their eyes open for it. And yeah, and you heard about it here on the Flower Podcast. How exciting! Okay, so I always like to end our episodes with a piece of advice. And Dundee, what would you like to leave our listeners with?
Oh gosh, is that everything happens for a reason. It sounds so cliche, but I used to get so upset with bad news or what I thought was bad news, or, and it's always turned out to be a blessing. Every time you learn something that you didn't think you wanted to learn, and I thought I'd learned all my lessons, but every single time, and that's been my big lesson, is embrace the moment and what's happening. And and then, I tell you, always it turns out to be that thing that seemed so hard at the moment was a blessing, and you actually made more progress than you thought. That's been my big lesson.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I think a lot of times we forget those things in that perspective. So I appreciate that. Well, Dundee, this has been a real treat. I would encourage you, if you want to learn more, to visit. Is it foamlabs.com, I believe, and
Mhm.
you can read more about this product and hear more about it. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to share more technical information maybe at some point in the next coming months, because I know that there's going to be questions and thoughts and and want to be able to help with the education around it. So Dundee, as always, I've just got to say thank you so much for being on the Flower Podcast.
Scott, I can't thank you enough for having me. Really, it's been such a pleasure.